By the time she turned 62, Carolyn Madsen had stopped believing anything could surprise her anymore. 3 decades of working wildlife rescue in the Ozark Highlands had shown her everything. Flash floods, gunshot wounds, tangled traps, fawns abandoned after car crashes, owls blinded by power lines. Her cabin office at Lone Cedar Station still smelled faintly of iodine and cedar shavings. The radio cracked every hour with something half urgent and half forgotten. She logged it all. She stitched, splinted, bottle-fed, and buried when she had to. So when her boots crunched onto the gravel in front of the station that cold October morning, Carolyn expected nothing more than the usual. A squirrel with mange, maybe a half-frozen raccoon. She didn't expect movement. It was barely dawn. The fog hadn't lifted. The pine trees along the station edge were soaked in silver light, but something was there, just to the left of the old rain barrel, pacing back and forth. A rhythm that was wrong for a raccoon, too smooth for a fox, too deliberate for a deer. Carolyn's breath caught. The shape was feline, compact, muscled, broad-chested, tawny fur dusted with frost. Her gait was quiet, but her shoulders trembled with tension. Every few seconds, she paused, lifted her head, and let out a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for wind. But Carolyn knew better. It was a chirp, a mother's call. Her gut clenched. She had heard that sound before, once in a coyote den where a litter had been taken. Once again during a search for a lynx that had lost her cubs to a wildfire. That sound wasn't made by animals that were lost. It was made by animals that had lost something. Suddenly, the image flashed. 2 bobcat kittens, brought in 3 nights ago, found curled in a hayloft of an abandoned barn 7 miles east. Healthy, sharp-eyed. Too healthy, Carolyn had thought at the time, to be orphans. They'd taken to formula fast, slept in a box lined with old towels. One had hissed at the ceiling fan. The other refused to eat unless swaddled in a faded denim shirt Carolyn kept for bottle babies. She hadn't stopped thinking about them. Something hadn't felt right, and now here, in the fog, in the chill, standing only 30 yards away, was their mother. Carolyn didn't breathe, didn't move. The bobcats stopped pacing. Their eyes met. No snarl, no crouch, no retreat. Just recognition, not of her, not of the station, but of a scent, a trace of something lost. Carolyn did the only thing she could. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached into her side satchel and pulled out the shirt. The faded denim still smelled of formula, pine wood, and something else. Fur, milk, fear. She let the breeze catch it. The bobcat froze. Her ears swiveled forward. Her body leaned ever so slightly into the wind. And then, as if dragged by some invisible tether, she took a single step forward. Carolyn felt her throat close. 100 pages of wildlife protocol screamed in her memory. Do not engage. Do not interfere. Do not imprint. And yet, something deeper stirred. This wasn't about rehab anymore. This was about return. And maybe it wasn't Carolyn who had rescued the kittens. Maybe it was this mother, this wild creature who had chosen her. She took a slow step back toward the cabin porch. The bobcat followed. Carolyn didn't speak. Words had no place here. She backed up slowly toward the porch, each creak of the wooden boards beneath her boots sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. Behind her, the worn screen door stood ajar, the same one she'd walked through 1,000 times without thinking. But this time, something sacred followed. 15 feet back, the bobcat shadowed her every move. Silent, watching, never breaking that taut thread of eye contact. Carolyn reached the top step and hesitated. Her fingers clenched tighter around the denim shirt, heart hammering. Inside that cabin, 2 kittens, a heater humming softly, sterile lights, the scent of disinfectant and powdered formula. And now, something wild at the threshold. Come on then, Mama, she whispered, not to coax, but to offer. A truce. A door opened. She turned and stepped inside. The bobcat paused. The porch light framed her in gold. Her breath fogged the air. She tilted her head slightly, ears forward, eyes wide, legs braced, like she wasn't sure if this was a trick or a trap. But then, from deep inside the hallway, a sound, a mew, then another, and another. Not fearful, not confused. Hopeful. The mother bobcat moved. She didn't sprint or skitter. She walked, slowly, each paw pressing down as if the floor might give way beneath her. Her shoulders rolled like storm waves. Her tail twitched once, and then she was inside. Carolyn stood against the hallway wall, barely breathing. The denim shirt dangled from her fingertips. The bobcat didn't even look at her. Not anymore. Her whole being was focused on the closed door at the end of the hall. Inside, quarantine room 1, a standard pen. 2 kittens wrapped in towels, one with a stubborn purr, one with a growl too big for its body. Carolyn fumbled for her phone and typed a single text to the staff group. "Clear the hall. Do not come out. I'm not asking. Just trust me." She slid the phone back into her pocket. Ahead, the bobcat stopped at the door. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with proximity. The scent was overwhelming. The cries were real. She chirped, a low, fractured sound, part agony, part relief. Carolyn stepped forward, her hand on the latch. Her voice came out as barely a breath. "You came for them," she said. "You never gave up." The door clicked open. At first, silence, then chaos. The kittens launched toward the opening like springs let loose. They crashed into the mesh, mewing wildly. The bobcat answered with a sound so raw it made Carolyn's knees weaken. A yowl pulled from the deepest part of her body. She lunged forward. The kittens clawed through the mesh, crying, pressing, purring. The mother shoved her head into their ears, licking, inspecting, pulling them against her chest. Trembling, Carolyn stepped back. She wasn't needed here. This wasn't a rescue. This was a reunion. Behind her, the hallway remained quiet, staff heeding her warning. Maybe someone peeked from the stairwell. Maybe someone cried. But no one interfered, because what they were witnessing, it didn't belong in a file report. It belonged in memory, in reverence. The bobcat curled her body around her kittens, licking them with frantic urgency, checking ears, paws, bellies. One of them chirped. The other head-butted her chin. She pulled them in tighter. Carolyn leaned against the wall, eyes burning. Her hand still clutched the denim cloth. She realized it was wet now. Not from formula, but from tears she hadn't noticed falling. Every instinct in her said this was a breach of every regulation, but every truth in her bones said it was right. And sometimes, that's the only rule that matters. The quarantine room had never felt like this before. It was usually all stainless steel trays and echoing barks, the hum of mini fridges and whiteboards filled with dosage notes. A place where biology ruled over emotion. But now it felt like church. The kind where you don't speak, not because you're told not to, but because you can't. Carolyn stood quietly at the doorframe, watching the bobcat and her kittens nestled together in the far corner of the pen. They were a tangle of fur and breath and trust. The kind of reunion no training manual had prepared her for. Behind her, a soft shuffle of boots. It was Jared, the newest intern. All of 22, fresh out of college, usually the first to speak too loud or move too fast. But not now. Now, his eyes were wide. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, one hand resting on the doorframe, mouth slightly open. "Don't move," Carolyn murmured, barely audible. "I'm not," he whispered. She could see the way he looked at the bobcat, like she was some mythical creature from a dream. And maybe in this moment she was. A few seconds later, Lisa, the night tech, appeared behind Jared. Her scrubs were wrinkled, coffee mug in hand. She took one look inside the room, blinked, and slowly lowered the mug without drinking. They watched together, not as co-workers or wildlife professionals, but as witnesses. Inside the pen, the mother bobcat had laid her head down, cheek pressed to her kittens' backs. Her breath came slow and even now. The tension had drained from her frame. One of the kittens suckled at her side, more for comfort than for nourishment. She had come a long way, through fog, through fences, through instinct that should have screamed, "Run!" She had come here, for them, and now they were whole again. A moment passed, maybe 10. Then, from behind them, a new voice. "Well," came a low drawl. "I guess that settles it." Carolyn turned to see Marshal Quinn, the park's senior ranger. Mid-60s, beard like pine bark, boots older than most interns. He didn't carry a clipboard. He didn't need one. Quinn had patrolled this part of the Ozarks longer than anyone. He peered into the room, squinted, and then smiled. Not the kind of smile you give to tourists. The kind that says, "I've seen a lot." But not this. "Was gonna ask if you'd lost your mind," he said softly. "But I think I get it now." "I didn't plan this," Carolyn said. "I know," he replied, "and I'm not gonna ask for paperwork." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "We're just going to..." "What? Let her stay?" Carolyn didn't answer immediately. She stepped into the room, slow and measured, crouched near the corner, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to see. The mother lifted her head and looked at her, not with fear, not with friendliness either, just understanding. "You see that?" Carolyn said, gesturing gently. "That's not a wild animal reacting to a threat. That's a mother who's decided. She chose to come here, and she chose to let us see this." Jared nodded slowly. "So what do we do now?" Carolyn glanced around. The bobcat's tail twitched once. The kittens were asleep again, bellies full, faces tucked beneath her chin. "We finished what she started," she said, and that was that. No formal meeting, no emails, no calls to state wildlife. Just a group of people who knew what right looked like, even if it didn't come with a signature. By midday, the sun had burned through most of the fog, and the chill that had clung to Lone Cedar Station was giving way to the warmth of early fall. Inside the main office, the air smelled like pine cleaner and damp wool. The staff had gathered around the old conference table, every chair taken, but no one slouched. No one joked, because in the center of the table lay the map. It had been unrolled hastily, corners pinned down with a coffee mug, a flashlight, and a tin of dried mealworms. A red grease pencil rested nearby, its tip already dulled from years of quick trails and sketchy plans. Carolyn traced her finger along a ridgeline north of the station. "Here," she said. "This is where they found the kittens. Abandoned barn just west of Bear Hollow. But look here." Her finger slid east along a sloping elevation. This stretch of overgrowth leads straight to Cold Spring Ridge. Marshal Quinn leaned over, chewing thoughtfully on a toothpick. "That creek's still running?" "Yep, year-round. And there's a cedar grove right above the bend. Thick canopy, lots of cover." Lisa squinted. "That's what, 3, maybe 4 miles from where she showed up?" "Just under 3 if she cut through Devil's Elbow," Carolyn replied. "It makes sense. If that barn was the halfway point, maybe something spooked her. Thunderstorm last week, maybe coyotes. But she didn't abandon them. She went looking. And ended up at your front door," Quinn said. Carolyn didn't respond right away. She just looked at the map. "She didn't end up here," she finally said. "She found us, knew where to look, knew who to trust." That quieted everyone. Across the table, Jared broke the silence. "So, do we relocate them? Build a release pen?" Quinn nodded. "Soft release, usual setup. Enough space for transition. We let them decide when to move on." Carolyn looked out the window, where the mother bobcat still rested in the quarantine pen. Her body curled protectively around her young. "If we're lucky," she said, "she'll recognize the place. Take them back herself." The team moved into action. Lisa began drafting intake amendments. Just enough paperwork to keep the station's files from catching fire later. Jared grabbed a crate from the back garage and started lining it with straw. Quinn radioed the wildlife biologist from the regional office, speaking in clipped tones, but ending the call with a gruff, "Yeah, I'll handle it." By late afternoon, The Jeep was packed. Carolyn insisted on driving, not out of ego, but because some things, she believed, you had to carry all the way through. Dr. Avery, the station's part-time vet, arrived just in time to double-check the mother Bobcat's vitals. She crouched beside the pen, eyes steady, voice calm. "She's lost weight," she murmured, lifting the Bobcat's paw gently. "But she's stable. Breathing's good, heart strong." She glanced toward the kittens, now tangled around their mother's belly like furry commas. And those two? Fat, furious, and ready to cause trouble. "That's what I like to see." Carolyn gave a short laugh. "We were just keeping them warm." Dr. Avery met her eyes. "No," she said. "You kept them together." The drive up the ridge took nearly an hour. The old ranger road was barely more than tire grooves through the brush. Branches scraped the Jeep's windows. Squirrels darted across the path. Twice they had to stop so Quinn could haul downed logs off the trail. Finally, the clearing appeared. Not marked, not fenced, just waiting. The grove was exactly as Carolyn remembered. Cedar trunks, tall and straight, a natural spring gurgling over smooth stones. The air was cool and damp. It smelled like moss and clean beginnings. They parked on the edge. Carolyn climbed out first, stepping softly over the pine needles. Her hands tightened around the crate as she made her way to a flat patch of earth just below the rise. She knelt. Jared stood beside her, quiet. "You want to do it?" he asked. Carolyn shook her head. "No." She came to me. "But this next part, it's not mine." She unlatched the crate. There was no rush, no scramble. The mother Bobcat stepped forward, her body unfolding like liquid shadow. She sniffed the air, ears twitching. Then, with a grace only the wild can teach, she stepped into the clearing like she belonged to it. The kittens followed, blinking in the filtered sunlight, tails stiff with excitement. They were home. Carolyn stayed kneeling, one hand resting gently on the open crate as the Bobcat padded forward. Slow, cautious, but without hesitation. She didn't look back. Not yet. She didn't need to. Every twitch of her ears, every ripple of muscle beneath her coat said she was alert, present. The kittens emerged behind her like popcorn in slow motion. One bolting ahead, the other pausing to sniff a leaf before tumbling after its sibling. They were awkward and bold, bright-eyed and reckless in the way only wild babies can be. Carolyn felt her chest tighten. It was perfect. It was painful. Lisa appeared beside her, camera in hand. Not for documentation this time, but something gentler. A quiet attempt to hold the moment in place. "She's not rushing," Lisa whispered. "She knows exactly where she is," Carolyn replied. The mother stopped at the edge of the cedar grove. The wind tugged at the tall grass, carrying scents they could only guess at. Deer, fox, damp soil, yesterday's rain. Her eyes scanned the tree line like a general surveying a battlefield. Then, finally, she turned. Just a glance. But it landed like a weight on Carolyn's chest. That look held everything. Caution, confidence, and something deeper. Something that didn't fit into words. Recognition. Then, just like that, she was gone. Slipping into the green, her kittens bouncing behind like echoes. No fanfare, no dramatic music. Just the soft thud of paws on pine needles and the steady return of forest silence. Carolyn let the breath out of her lungs. It felt like she'd been holding it for hours. Dr. Avery joined her, one hand on the crate for balance. "You okay?" she asked. Carolyn nodded, but her voice was rough when she answered. "Yeah, it's just..." She trailed off. What was it? A letting go? A beginning? A goodbye she hadn't realized she needed? "She chose where to go," Carolyn finally said. "And she took them with her." Avery nodded, quiet. "Some things," she said, "you don't get to rehearse." They stood together in silence, watching the spot where the Bobcat had vanished. There was nothing to see now. No rustling, no flash of fur. Just trees, birdsong, and the sense that something had passed through and left the place better for it. Back at the station, life didn't stop. Emails still piled up, A fawn with a limp arrived 2 days later. A red-tailed hawk with a broken wing the day after that. Jared accidentally left the freezer door cracked open overnight and ruined 3 weeks' worth of donated mice. But everything felt quieter. Not in sound, in spirit, like the building had exhaled. And then, one morning, just before Thanksgiving, Carolyn stepped out onto the porch with her mug of chicory coffee and spotted something in the frost. Tracks. 3 sets. 1 large, 2 smaller. They curved near the edge of the wood line, meandered halfway toward the porch, then turned again. Deliberate, unhurried. Just passing through, Carolyn crouched beside them, her palm hovering just above the nearest print. They were clean, crisp, only a few hours old. She didn't call for anyone, didn't grab her phone. She just stayed there, letting the cold bite into her knees, letting herself feel it. They had come back, not to stay, not to beg, just to be seen. And to say, in the only way they could, "We remember." In the days that followed, Carolyn checked the trail cameras more often than usual. Not obsessively, but with a quiet hope she hadn't felt in years. The cameras were old, some half fogged with age, the timestamps always off by a few minutes. But they still did their job. They blinked to life at dusk, watched the woods in silence, and blinked off again at dawn. Most days they caught what you'd expect. A blur of raccoon, a deer stepping daintily through the snow. Sometimes just the wind rustling the branches like something unseen was passing through. And then, one morning, as she clicked through the stills with one hand wrapped around a too-cold mug of tea, there she was. Not a perfect shot, not framed like a postcard, but unmistakable. A sleek figure mid-step, spotted coat rippling, shoulders broad, tail a thick brushstroke behind her. Her head was turned slightly, golden eyes glowing in the flash. The Bobcat. Carolyn let out a breath and leaned closer. 2 smaller shapes trailed behind. One bounding ahead, caught mid-leap. The other crouched low to the ground, like it was practicing a stalk. Her throat tightened. They looked bigger now, stronger. Their spots a little fainter. Their bodies leaner, legs longer. Still young, but not helpless. Wild. Thriving. She saved the image. Not to share online, not for data, just for herself. A private echo of something too big to name and too fragile to hold. Later that week, Marshal Quinn stopped by the station, bringing with him a new box of trail tags and a thermos full of black coffee that smelled like burnt rubber and memories. He didn't ask for updates. He just sat on the porch with her, watching the tree line. "Still thinking about her?" he asked after a while. Carolyn didn't answer directly. Instead, she sipped from her cup and said, "You ever have something pass through your life that leaves a mark bigger than the moment?" Quinn smiled beneath his beard. "Only every year since I started this job." Carolyn nodded. "That wasn't just a reunion. It was a correction." He grunted thoughtfully. "Of what?" "Of something the wild wasn't supposed to lose." Quinn was quiet for a while. Then he leaned back in the creaky porch chair, boots resting on the railing. "You know," he said, "most people don't realize how hard it is to do the right thing when it doesn't look like the safe thing." Carolyn glanced at him, surprised. He rarely talked like that, but maybe he felt it too. That invisible shift, that sense that something old had found its way back. "Would you do it again?" he asked. Carolyn stared at the woods. "Yes," she said, "even knowing I might never see her again. I'd still open that door, because sometimes the point isn't what you get back, it's what you give." And Carolyn had given her a second chance, not at survival, but at belonging. At completing a story nature had started long before any of them showed up with their rules and release forms. She took another sip of her tea. The pines rustled in the wind, soft and hollow. Somewhere out there, a mother bobcat was teaching her young to leap without falling, to listen for danger, to smell the air and know what was coming. They would learn to survive. Not because someone had tamed them, but because someone hadn't. And that mattered more than any certificate on the wall. Winter crept in slowly that year. The kind of winter that didn't roar in with blizzards or shuttered roads, but slipped quietly beneath door frames, frosting window corners and stiffening the hinges on the back gate. At Lone Cedar Station, the porch rail wore a new coat of rime every morning. The smell of thawed venison stew lingered in the hall. And everything, from the hawks in rehab to the interns on coffee runs, moved a little slower. Carolyn found herself looking out the kitchen window more than usual, not for any reason, not because she expected movement, just listening. And then, one night, just before New Year's, something stirred on the porch. She was halfway through a crossword, a blanket thrown over her lap, the station radio mumbling weather warnings in the background. Then, a thump, followed by a slow scratching sound. Not frantic, not frightened. Deliberate. She froze, set the pencil down, pulled the blanket aside, opened the door, and there, standing under the glow of the porch light like something out of a story, was the Bobcat. Bigger, stronger, beautiful. Her winter coat had come in thick, speckled with faint snowflakes. Her ears twitched, tall and tufted. Her body was lean, but solid. A creature not just surviving, but thriving. In her mouth, she held a rabbit. Still warm, still whole. Behind her, two shapes hovered at the edge of the clearing. The kittens, no longer kittens. Lanky now, their movements less clumsy, their eyes bright with caution. Carolyn didn't move. The Bobcat padded forward, silent on the wooden planks, and laid the rabbit at Carolyn's feet. Then she looked up. Her amber eyes didn't blink. They didn't ask for anything. They simply said, "I remember." Carolyn dropped to one knee, not out of shock, not to reach out, just to be level, eye to eye. "Hey," she whispered, "look at you." The Bobcat stepped closer, not brushing against her, not breaking the invisible line between wild and tame, but acknowledging it. She dipped her head, and for a brief second, pressed her brow softly to Carolyn's knee, just like that day in the hallway. Just like before. Then she turned. A soft chirp left her throat, low and deep. The two young bobcats responded immediately, darting back into the shadows, their tails flicking behind them like whispers. She followed, vanishing into the dark. No fanfare, no sound but the creak of the porch wood beneath Carolyn's feet. Gone again. But this time, not like before. This time it didn't feel like an end. It felt like recognition, a gesture, a kind of wild gratitude that needed no translation. Carolyn sat back, her knees stiff against the cold wood. She looked down at the rabbit. Plump, clean, clearly killed with precision. A gift. Or maybe not a gift. Maybe just a statement. I made it. I'm feeding my own now. You helped once, so here, just so you know. Tears welled in Carolyn's eyes, hot against the frozen air. She didn't cry often. Not even when animals died on her watch. Not when paperwork piled up. Not even when old Ranger Klein passed away 2 winters ago and left behind nothing but a harmonica and 3 unfinished birdhouses. But tonight, she let it come. Not because she was sad, because she was grateful. Carolyn didn't bring the rabbit inside. She knew better. Instead, she carried it, carefully, reverently, to the edge of the woods where the pine needles formed a thick carpet over the snow. She laid it on a flat stone just beneath the cedar branches, where the moonlight could touch it. Then she stepped back, not as a keeper, not as a rescuer, but as someone who understood the unspoken rules of the wild. Leave the gift, leave the space, let the forest decide the rest. The next morning, the rabbit was gone. No tracks, no signs of a struggle. Just a few scattered tufts of fur and a smooth imprint where something heavy had rested, curled briefly in the cold. She said nothing to the others. This moment, this visit, wasn't for the station log or the board's year-end report. It was hers. A few days into January, a second trail camera lit up with new footage. This time it was clearer. The Bobcat stood on a ridge above the frozen creek, her silhouette backlit by the low sun. Her young flanked her like sentinels, bigger now, nearly her size, their steps matching hers in near-perfect rhythm. Carolyn watched the footage in her office alone, sipping weak coffee and pausing the video again and again, just to study their shapes. One of the young ones had a slight nick in its ear. Another had a pale band of fur across its back, a mark she hadn't noticed before. They looked confident, not just alive, capable. It made something settle deep inside her, like a sigh she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. The next staff meeting came and went. New injuries arrived: a porcupine with a limp, a coyote pup with frostbitten paws. Carolyn stayed busy, stayed moving, stayed steady. But now and then, when no one was looking, she'd glance out toward the tree line and wonder, would they come back again? She didn't expect them to, because that's not how the wild works. Wild animals don't make repeat visits. They don't knock on doors or pose for goodbyes. They return only when necessary, and when they do, it's not for comfort. It's to prove something, and they had already proven it. They had survived. She'd done her part. Late one evening, Lisa found Carolyn sitting in the darkened office, watching the same clip for the third time. "Still hoping for a sequel?" Lisa asked gently. Carolyn shook her head. "No, I think that was it." Lisa leaned against the doorframe. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so small, a cry, a paw print, can change your whole idea of what this work means?" Carolyn smiled, tired but warm. "It's not about changing it. It's about reminding us." She turned off the monitor and stood, reminding us that this work, this life, is shared. And in that quiet moment, the only sound between them was the soft creak of the wooden floor. And far in the distance, the faint, solitary chirrup of something moving through the trees. February passed like a long exhale, slow, gray, and dusted in soft snow that rarely stuck for long. At Lone Cedar Station, life returned to its rhythm. Intake logs, rehab schedules, weather reports scribbled on whiteboards. Someone fixed the back door hinge that had squeaked since Christmas. The interns debated whether the Fox kit in Pen 3 was faking his limp to avoid being released too soon. Quinn grumbled about budget cuts, then showed up an hour early every morning anyway. But for Carolyn, something had changed. Not in her job, not in her body, in her way of watching. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The particular curve of paw prints along the trail, deeper on the right side. The way a rabbit's fur snagged in the underbrush 3 feet lower than normal. The hush that fell over the trees right before a bobcat cry echoed. And sometimes she'd hear it again, that call, far off, not pleading, not lost. Just marking presence. A wild voice saying, "We're still here." In early March, a local school sent a group of kids for a field trip. Wide-eyed third graders with clipboards and juice boxes, asking 1,000 questions per minute. Carolyn gave them the standard tour. Birds of prey in the flight pen, a turtle with a cracked shell, a possum with a bent tail. Then one girl, maybe 8 years old, tugged on Carolyn's sleeve. "Do animals ever say thank you?" she asked. Carolyn blinked. Behind her, the other kids chased each other with laminated species checklists. She crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "Not like we do," she said gently. "They don't write letters or say words." "Then how do you know?" the girl asked. Carolyn thought about that night on the porch. The rabbit, the glance, the silent step toward her knee. "You don't always," she said. "But sometimes, you just feel it." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood. And maybe she did. That night, Carolyn sat on the porch long after the lights had gone out inside. The woods were quiet again. That sacred kind of quiet that doesn't mean empty, just undisturbed. She sipped her tea and let her eyes adjust to the dark. No visitors came, but she wasn't disappointed, because it wasn't about the visits anymore. It was about the knowing that somewhere out there, beneath the canopy of stars, between the whispering branches, above the frozen creek, a bobcat and her grown young moved through the forest without fear, because someone had held a door open and then stepped aside. Spring came late that year, the kind of spring that tested your patience, Warm mornings followed by sudden sleet. Daffodils brave enough to bloom only to get knocked flat by an April freeze. But the birds came back anyway. The creek swelled with meltwater. The air changed. And with it, so did something in Carolyn. Not a dramatic shift, no grand epiphany. Just a slow unspooling of something that had been tightly wound for too long. She started walking the perimeter trail every morning again. Not to check for damage, not for data. Just to listen. To notice. Sometimes she saw tracks. Not fresh, not many, but enough. A small oval here, a heavy round print there. Always in pairs. Always just passing through. She never saw them again with her own eyes. Not the mother, not the young, and that was okay. In fact, it was perfect. Because wildness, real wildness, doesn't circle back for applause. It doesn't seek comfort or recognition. It moves forward, fiercely, gracefully, without permission. Still, every now and then, she'd find something left behind. A scrape mark near the back fence, a feather, torn and discarded. Once a set of claw marks on a birch tree, high enough to suggest a leap with real power behind it. Proof, not of dependence, but of success. Late one evening in May, Carolyn stepped into her office and found a package waiting for her on the desk. No note, just a small hand-carved wooden figure. A bobcat, mid-step, head slightly lowered, tail curved just so. Someone had taken care to smooth every line. Carolyn ran her fingers over the grain, then placed it on the windowsill, where the moonlight would find it. Where the wild, if it ever passed by again, might see it and recognize the shape. She didn't ask who had carved it. Didn't need to. Some gestures don't need a name. That night, as she sipped her tea and listened to the frogs calling from the far pond, Carolyn whispered quietly to the dark, "Run far, stay wild, don't look back." And in that moment, surrounded by trees, wrapped in shadow and memory and the faint smell of cedar, she understood the quiet miracle of what had happened. Not a rescue, not a reunion, a restoration. Something broken had found its missing pieces and walked back into the world whole again. And all she'd done, the only thing that truly mattered, was open the door. And then let it go.